this should be the hub where people go to when they say that we want to know which are the really good poets, the really good artists. So if anybody wants to know, they'll be like, oh, the one-stop shop, PUO. If you want to know the people to contact, if you want to know who are the movers and the shakers in the space, that is the place to go to, because we've got high caliber poets in this. Oh my gosh, the quality of our poets is just amazing. And not only in South Africa, but because also with the SAST, it's that whole Pan-African vision to it, right? Where you want to be the theater for Africa. And we really, really do want to bring Africa to the world, because our talent is amazing. That goes without saying.
Author, poet, and host Emmah Mabye is here with us, who is very internationally acclaimed, having performed in poetry festivals in places like Belgium, New Zealand, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Your Mother's Society, and all over the township. She also has her own book called Clocking In, which has also been adapted into a theater production. Well done, you know? But we need to talk about this poem you just did.
Oh, yeah.
That was intense. Yeah. That was deep. Motherless. Do you not have a mother?
I do, but at the time it didn't feel like it.
Really? How so?
So yeah, Motherless is just really one of those poems that I don't like performing. Some people have a saying that some things are close to home, but with this poem, it was home. At the time that I wrote it, I was, just looking at this interaction between my mother and my sisters, right? So I was just watching these scenes playing themselves out, and I was inspired to write about it. But as time progressed, now whatever was being meted out to my sisters was not being meted out to me. And I was just like, whoa, I didn't write this poem to take it on, you know? But I saw myself now just living through this. And I obviously went to poetry, because poetry for me is my therapy, it is my solace. And the more I performed it, I got just so much therapy through writing the poem, explaining the situation between my mother and myself, where there's this absence of a relationship, the distance between a mother and a daughter. So that is just how the poem came about.
So in context to mothers and daughters, why did you feel the need to sort of break down, because in the whole poem, you're basically breaking down the relationship between a mother and a perfect daughter, you know? Why do you think African mothers want their children to aspire to be perfect? And why is it so difficult for the children, be it a daughter or a son, to meet up to those expectations?
It's not so much the perfect daughter for me, as it is the perfect wife. Because I feel like in the grooming of a Black woman, I'm going to take it to my home, since I cannot speak for other homes. But it was, how do I groom you to be somebody else's wife? You know, wake up at a certain time, do certain things, certain chores, and. And if you don't, it's a matter of which man is going to marry you. You know, we don't want you now to be leaving this house, going into somebody else's house, and then having the in-laws tell you, pack your bags, go home, because you were not groomed well. But in the midst of all of this, and I'm like, but I'm not some machine that I'm just out here to be, churning out chores and all of that. Sit me down and ask, what do you want out of your life? What is your purpose? Do you even want marriage? So I just wanted that, can we have that connection where you're seeing me for me and not other people's daughters, because they are married and all of that, because I hated the comparisons. Is that now people, mid-20s, they are all married, they have kids, but what about you? But what about me? Ask me about me. Get to know me for me.
It's tricky though, because now having to tell that context to an African parent is a different story with laws and customs, Yeah. How do you feel you dealt with that situation? Because it's very relatable to everyone. The relatability is like amazing,
Let me touch on the relatability and then how I dealt with it. So it really did surprise me how relatable it was, because initially for me, it was I'm writing this in my own world, thinking that this is only playing itself out in my home. But then you go out there and people are like, but this is me. I remember you mentioned, the book, Clocking In, at the launch. And there was a guy who, after the show, came afterwards and said, you just brought home here. Because I left home where this situation is also playing itself out. And I just knew that I needed to leave. And this is how it is at home. And I was just like, wow, so guys can also relate. That's sad, On dealing with it. that was...
Have you?
Listen, I had to leave home, and thankfully I could, right, at the time. And not everybody can leave their house, their homes, I had to leave home, distance myself, because it was just not working out. I remember being at Poetry Africa. That's the biggest Poetry Africa festival, poetry festival in Africa. And this one student came up to me and said, she was so emotional and said, "Help me, because this is me. How do I do it?" And I was like, in all honesty, I don't know. Because at the time, I had not learned or dealt with fully dealing with the situation, But what I do know for sure, and what I did tell her, is that you have to acknowledge that this is not about you. You are not at fault. Because I had to come to that point too and saying, but this is not about me. I'm not at fault. I'm doing everything you're telling me to do. Right? I mean, we had, as I said, that great relationship.
Yes.
So how did we come to this point, So it was acknowledging that this is not me. I have my own timeline. I have things that I want to do my own way. So if that's not going to be respected, excuse, But over time, talking about it, talking through it, and which is actually how my mother got to hear of this poem, because it's very difficult to sit down, an African parent, and say, this is my truth. This is how I feel. Because our truth is not palatable for our parents. It might be regarded as rude.
It's how you get homeless quick. It's
do you want to live in whose house? So in therapy, I think therapy really, really helps. We're in a much better space now, thankfully, but it took a while.
So with that being said, I mean, you said someone asked you how you dealt with it, And I've realized that you as a poet, you really channel into your work. Like you just go deep into it to give you time to get yourself out of that zone, How do you separate yourself from your work, basically?
A lot of breathing exercises. And that's why I said that I don't like performing this poem, because it brings me in there. And now to take me out of that just takes a whole lot of, okay, I need a corner. Let me breathe, just a lot of breathing exercises and just remembering, okay, where am I? We're done. Okay, let's keep things moving.
So it's a whole acting situation.
It is.
Is that why your book, Clocking In, became a whole theater production? Please tell us about that. I mean, it's not all the time where poets really do their compilations and then drop them, but to adapt it into a theater production, where did that idea come about?
It wasn't even my idea.
Really?
It really wasn't. At the time of creating the book, for me, it was just a matter of, I have a book, I want to put it out to the masses. Here you go, And so 2017, the South African State Theatre, the SST Theatre came to me and they were like, okay, so we've got the incubator program. And I'll forever be grateful for the State Theatre for that. Like, I would have never put a book on stage,
You must be grateful for the picture of you they put up on the corridors.
Listen, I'm there, And so they told me about the incubator program. We sat down. I remember the day still so well. And I was just like, oh my gosh, is this really happening? Is this really possible, that I can have this work put onto stage as young as I am, and I didn't feel I was well established then, but it's just like, I can actually do this. So brought together other poets, Donald, Afrika, Itai, and put the production together. So that was that was a very momentous occasion for me. Yeah. So it was basically opportunity presented itself. Yeah.
And within that, how do you get like opportunities as a poet? I mean, it's a very difficult landscape generally as an artist of any form, But how have you navigated it for so long? Because you've been doing it for a while now, and being in spaces where you can reach incubator programs, How do you circumnavigate the whole poetry landscape?
I'm actually just like thinking of like how I started. So I started in Pretoria, right? And a poet by the name of Donald Nyosepian Mahlangu then introduced me to the Joburg poetry scene. In that time for me, it was about be everywhere, go anywhere you are invited. Even if you're not invited, be there.
Did you have the head wrap?
No. No, I didn't.
Okay,
And
cool.
it was about just being anywhere and everywhere so that people can know my work. Because nobody will come to Tembisa and say, hey, Emma, we hear that you are doing poetry, come perform, you know? It's putting yourself out there. And I've been very fortunate in the sense that referrals for me, just like they come, you know? I'm not bragging, but I'm just like, you know, like, I don't, like, people would come and be like, you are the main act. You're not, you know, just like the others. You are the main act kind of thing. And it's like, oh, okay, pretty cool. So, but that comes from referrals. And that for me has been really big, from people saying that I've seen you perform there, please come perform here. Or merely somebody else saying is that, okay, I know somebody who can do the job. Emma is the girl for you, go. And because I also love this thing, I love poetry, man. Like, it's kapelelo moya, you know? So that's just how I've kept going in this art.
So now, the business of poetry. I mean, you even call it a job, you know?
Yes,
You're
yes.
always striving to make sure that you are able to feed yourself with this poetry thing, you know? How have you circumnavigated the business landscape when it comes to management, bookings, all of that jazz?
It's still a work in progress, in all honesty. Because when you come into the space, you come thinking that this is passion. I'm pushing P, you know, pushing that passion, you know. But
No,
then,
pushing P means?
I will push my P, which is
Okay,
passion.
sorry.
Let me
Okay,
keep
cool.
it at
Okay,
that.
cool.
My P is passion, okay? So now where you come and somebody says to you, okay, so we've got this corporate gig, how much are you charging? You're like, but how does this work? Because I come from a background of your 100 rand, you know, there, 500 rand winning a slam, here's the money, you know. So it took quite some time actually to adjust to that. And it's been learning by experience, in all honesty. Because nobody sat me down and said, this is how it's going to be. And also it was just like, who do I ask? Because my peers, Lobo, and now we're kind of like on the same level kind of thing, you know? So it was a whole lot of learning from experience, how things work. And then along the way, when you get like more into the things, you're like, okay, now I need help. So at that point, then I'm like asking other people. So admin-wise, how do I do things like invoicing? How do I, you know, get around to doing a profile, a bio? Yeah.
Which is probably 14 pages long or so.
The years show on that bio.
Also, you strike me like you're a very introverted person. You know, you strike me as a person who's very towards herself until you're on stage, you know, which makes me wonder, what have been your biggest fears when it comes to writing and performing poetry?
It's not a fear. It's...
Challenge?
Challenge would be writing for corporate. Because when somebody comes to you, or just, you know, anybody who commissioned work, basically, where somebody says, okay, here we have a theme, we want you to speak to it. And now you're like, okay, I mean, I have to write, give it to you and get the feedback, right? At that moment in time, it's like, this could go either north or south. There's no in between, right? So now, and it's judgment on your work. And I mean, this is my work, so I obviously take it personally. Sure, it's going to be given to you, right? But at the end of the day, it's me putting myself and my thoughts and my creativity onto paper. It's different when I'm writing for myself. Because it's me. It's for me, however you receive it, I really don't care. I might ask somebody to edit and review it, but at the end of the day, it's my work. With the commissioned poem, I'm writing it to meet your expectation as the client. You as a client are also thinking of, will this speak to the event? Will this also be good enough for my audience, right? So it's all those factors to take into account. So that's quite the challenge. And I think, but at the same time, commissioned work is my favorite because it gets you to like write stuff.
Oh, I thought you were going to say because it pays. Okay, sorry.
Well, it pays nicely too, you know? But it's the challenge factor for me. It really is, yeah.
So because you're so popular, there's questions from like major fans, you know, from the audience. People on Facebook were actually asking a lot of questions, and I'm just going to read through them.
Okay.
So there's a guy, it's a cool name, Nanya Business. Do you know them?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and he wants to know, what has been your biggest admin-related challenge as an independent artist?
Pricing myself properly.
Oh yeah, no, that is an issue for everyone.
Yeah. Because sometimes you're just like, okay, am I coming in too high? Where you going to be rejected? Am I coming in too low? Which does a great disservice for other poets who are also going to come in, you know? So that has been, at some point, I actually remember contacting some of my poet friends and be like, the ones who I know, like charge real good and have got red cards, and be like, can I please outsource this function to you guys? Because yeah, it can be quite challenging.
Oh, okay, cool. And he actually posed two questions to you, you know, and he says, how do you think artists can improve on building their audiences for their craft?
Firstly, hone your craft. When you know what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it, it will attract people quite easily, I feel. You know, when people can see that you take what you're doing seriously,
Yeah.
you are good at what you do, they will come to you. And I also feel like collaboration is really huge to get yourself out of the poetry world into other spaces. I remember doing Fakugesi, a digital innovation
Innovation
festival,
Festival,
right?
yeah.
That was like very mind-boggling for me, because I'm like, here I am going into a digital innovation festival and a space in which it's not really my area of interest, but I have to write towards that. And it was so cool. I worked with an illustrator, someone who I know I would have never met and never worked with. And, you know, so there are people who are all about, you know, 4IR, AI, digital technology and stuff, could see, you know, the marrying of this poetry and this illustration come together, you know. And if they had not known me there, they probably might not have heard of me elsewhere. You know, so it's just going into other spaces outside of poetry, meeting other artists, you know, apart from the musicians. As I said, you've got your illustrators, meet out with other people, collaborate. I think when you can tap into each other's worlds, tap into each other's audiences, that I feel builds a whole lot of
How do you think you sort of establish that fluidity? Because it's not easy just going into a whole different space. I mean, this whole digital space, it's very important now, especially after the whole COVID-19 pandemic. Everybody had to go digital, you know.
Yeah.
But how important was it for you to sort of learn and adapt, but without feeling like you're taking away from your original craft, which is being in front of people and making people cry?
I don't always make people cry, please. I think it just, sure, that is such a good question. It's the creativity at the end of the day. And because I'm a storyteller, well, that for me is what I like to do through my work, is that what story am I telling? In whichever space I'm in, be it poetry spaces, be it corporate, be it, you know, for whichever commissioned work it is that I want a story from whatever you are presenting to me to write about. That I want you to take you on this journey, to take you on a path. At the end of the day, once I have that foundation and base, everything just comes together.
Smart, very smart. So our last question is from a Kukuletu Dladla, right? The first thing she says is, oh, wow. And then she says you're an amazing woman. But here's a serious question that's posed to you, you know? She's interested in knowing, how does the poetry industry support young girls and their programs? And do you guys believe that talking does more than action? Or, no, do you believe that talking does more than the action and the activities that take place in the performing arts, you know, like schools, and like there's more people are talking about it, but there's not really actual initiatives being happening? And if they are, how does she access those?
So in terms of spaces for women, what's really awesome is that there are a lot of open calls available online. It's just searching, you know, for the right places. But there are a lot of open calls which have got certain criteria.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's also gender, like they want a certain gender, and race, they want Black females. So people could write to, you know, submit their work, collaborate as well in those kind of initiatives. In terms of schools, what's really cool is when you can get invited to schools, you know, where you can address young people. There is also a poetry movement by Mandy Vundla, where she, you know, does work with young people, and not just girls, but like young people, particularly targeted at high school students, you know, to get them to writing and to workshop them and get them to perform. So that is really awesome. Sometimes the tricky part of it, you know, which just goes back to the whole admin of it, is that when, I mean, I have a 9 to 5, so it does become tricky to avail myself, is that we have good hearts to do these things, as someone once said, extreme quoting, but we just have got terrible schedules, you know, where we don't have the time or the ability to go into spaces. But where we are invited, this is a call for all schools and everybody else who wants us, in these spaces. We do come through, we do come in.
That's true.
And actions. Poetry is very subjective. Art, in general, is subjective. So there's only so much that we can do through our work. It's awesome that we can engage or initiate conversations, right? How you take it and what you want to do is up to you. I can't make you act on things. Because I can just think of 2 instances in which locally there was a certain event promoter. Dude knew all our poems, mostly around GBV, the ones that make us cry, the ones in which we are lamenting the situation in the country, right?
Yeah.
He could say them word for word. Behind closed curtains, he is the perpetrator.
The perpetrator,
So, we can sit and talk about the poems, unpack them. And you would think that would, put something in someone's mind to say that I don't want to be this person because this is what it does to other women. But no, he acted completely opposite. So that action we cannot take upon ourselves for you to do. It's up to you, right, as the listener. The other one was, I was in Sweden. And there's a certain poem which is very, very tricky there when it comes to racial issues and performing it in front of white people because you're like, how are they going to receive it? But I do it anyway, right? Because it's life, it's reality. And I'm writing of that experience and hoping that we can engage about this and what, mirror up, people can reflect and see.
Yeah.
So this one young lady comes up to me and I was so shocked. She says, thank you for doing that poem. It helped me acknowledge my privilege. And then she went into how she would like to change things going forward. Unheard of. I've been doing this poem in South Africa. No white person has ever said such things or any other person, And here she can be, and here I am in a foreign land and somebody can say, I heard your poem, you spoke, I will act on it.
So as over the years, poetry has grown, it's evolved, and how would you say there's been a difference when you think about poetry 10 years ago? There's more platforms, it's being more open, especially as a form of social commentary. It's not being taken as a form of social commentary. What type of responsibility or social responsibility do you feel you have as a poet, especially when you put your work out, Because it has an effect.
Yes, it does.
You're a voice to the voiceless, and sometimes your voice influences. How do you curate basically the message that you put out there?
For me, it's, as I said, firstly telling a story and also hoping that it's a mirror for people to see. Is that if you're not seeing, why are you not seeing? Putting up a mirror to say that reflect. It's a time for introspection, whether you do it internally, you do it externally. But I just really want people to be able to say that I can hear Emmah speak to the times. And if I can achieve that, then awesome.
Speaking of hearing Emmah speak,
Yeah.
you used to have a whole online show going on, and now you have this.
Yeah.
Right? So a lot of people don't know that this is all you actually, Tell us how this idea came about, but tell us where originally it started.
So, advent of COVID, 2020, we are all locked down, we are in our homes. And, theater spaces were now closed, event venues and whatever else we could not do anymore. And so being in our homes, people then migrated to online platforms.
Yeah.
And it was, cool that we're seeing people being entertained and all of those things. But for me, I felt like there was something that I was missing. There were certain conversations that I wanted to hear and I wasn't hearing. So instead of complaining about it, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm gonna have these conversations. And it wasn't just about the performance element for me because there were no performances. I didn't want that. I wanted to be talking about the background things that happen because all too often people inbox and say, hey, Emmah, I want to know how to get to where you are. And it's like, it's all good to be on stage, but there are happenings before you get onto that stage. There are discussions that are to be had that nobody teaches you and tells you until you are in there. So let's talk about invoicing. Let's talk about generating an invoice. Let's talk about managing your tax affairs. And I was very, very privileged, and I will forever be grateful to everybody who came on board, you know. I had your Lebo Mashile, Dr. Mhlope, Makafule Vilagazi, the list is endless, right?
Yeah.
Come through and just talk about their journeys as well. Because we can also learn from other people's experiences and
Definitely,
their
yeah.
journeys and saying, oh, okay, so this is how not to do things, you know? And so that was 2020. It was absolutely awesome. And then 2021, adulting happened. Like I could not do anything. So I paused it. And then now in 2022, I'd been thinking about how to bring it back, you know, and I was just like really struggling to think, okay, so how do we revamp it? And one random text I got from Gatlo Choma, our creative director. And he said that he wanted to do a stage collaboration. And that was, you know, in light of the clocking in production.
Yes.
And I was just like, I'm not bringing clocking production, or, you know, clocking in production back. But, you know, if we could collaborate in other ways. And so he brought the idea of, how about we have this platform where we've got a performance segment and still continue with what we did in real talking sessions, where we've got the education element of it. So it's edutainment at the end of the day. And so that for me was like really pivotal, because you can't just be performing, you know,
Yeah,
be a
definitely.
well-rounded artist, where you know on and off camera what are the things that need to be honed, right? And so I then took this to the State Theatre, and I will forever, ever be grateful for the SA State Theatre for buying into the idea, and even more so for investing in it. So forever, ever truly grateful. So they were like, okay, we're gonna partner with you guys, let's do this. And so this is how we are here today with PUO.
Because collaboration is key.
Collaborate,
you know?
thank you.
And
yes.
because you being the mastermind, you know, you're going to be running the whole show, you know, and what type of feel are you trying to go for? And what type of message are you trying to get out there when it comes to being a poet and understanding the whole business of poetry and people getting to hear those poems that not just about making us cry?
Yeah. So it's going to be cool for me. First and foremost, my big ideal and just the partnership with SAS is that this should be the hub where people go to when they say that we want to know which are the really good poets, the really good artists. So if anybody wants to know, they'll be like, oh, the one-stop shop, PUO. If you want to know the people to contact, if you want to know who are the movers and the shakers in the space, that is the place to go to, because we've got high caliber poets in this. Oh my gosh, the quality of our poets is just amazing.
It is,
and
it
not
is,
only
yeah.
in South Africa, but because also with the SAST, it's that whole Pan-African vision to it, right? Where you want to be the theater for Africa. And we really, really do want to bring Africa to the world, because our talent is amazing. That goes without saying. But now we need to bring it to other people, is that we need to see the quality of work that we do,
Yeah.
how good people are, and how seriously we actually do take this poetry art form.
Cool. I mean, call me up when it goes overseas, you know. Don't forget about us. But, you
Of
know, all the
course.
best
Thank
for the
you.
future. And thank you so much. Keep doing all the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Away.